Hello, YouTubers out there. This is Jerry Saravia at the movies. So here we are. It's 2023. Hard to believe, and January 5th of 2023, which means that later in about 6 months, it's going to be 40 years ago that I first saw Star Wars: Return of the Jedi. Very weird, amongst a lot of other movies, of course, from that year. But anyway, um, another one would be one I'm going to mention in just a second, but I wanted to briefly talk about how films are part of my DNA. Movies are part of my DNA. How did this happen? As I said in the previous video, discussing the differences between film critic and movie reviewer, which of course is just a matter of semantics, I did mention how I started writing star ratings and a little capsule review on each one of these newspaper ads and stuff like that from way back when. I think I started in 1982 doing that on a bulletin board. So I had this need to somehow review movies. It was inspired, obviously, at that time by Siskel and Ebert, which their show at that time was called Sneak Previews. And reading Midnight Movies, which is one book in particular, and Danny Peary's Cult Movies volume, because at that time I lived in Queens, New York, so we lived right across the street from the Queensboro Public Library, literally across the street. I mean, you can't get any closer to a library than living across the street from one, which I got to say was really great because that was my resource center, and of course I had a whole bunch of film books. But at that time, I would see a lot of escapist movies. That was kind of my thing, for the most part. And I guess I wasn't really an adventurous film goer yet. I mean, we're talking now when I was about roughly 10, 11 years old. So, Star Wars I would watch repeatedly, and although not Empire Strikes Back at that time, certainly Raiders of the Lost Ark, which I've already discussed in quite a few videos back, which changed my life because I became interested in cinema, but not in an adventurous sense, not really exploring films left and right. But I think it was around the time that Luis Bunuel, a Spanish filmmaker who made films like An Andalusian Dog, Simon of the Desert, a bunch of surrealist films, The Golden Age, which is easily the most controversial film I think he ever made, which was back in 1930. But the weekend that he died, my family and we went to the Biograph Cinema, which I believe is not around anymore, in New York City, and we saw Luis Bunuel films, Simon of the Desert being one of them. And I was really taken. It seemed like I was exploring a whole different journey that was still somewhat escapist, because it wasn't reality, it was surrealism. But I felt, there is something more. And, I'd seen other movies in the 70s, even when I was just a kid, that were more adult movies, like Kramer versus Kramer, which I don't even recall now if I mentioned it in my 70s movie, looking back at films I saw back then, because I know I left out All the President's Men. So I'd seen other kinds of films, and I was entertained by them. And they were memorable experiences, but I wasn't thinking in that track of mind. I was just more, looking back, it was like Moonraker, King Kong. It was those type of movies that I still have an affection for, action adventure type movies. But after seeing the Luis Bunuel retrospective, at least in my mind, I believe it was around that time in 1983, 40 years ago, I started to change my tune somewhat, and I knew there was more to film than just being entertained, which there's nothing wrong with it. A lot of people go to the movies to escape reality, and it's understandable. You can escape to a good book, it's the same thing. But you can't completely devoid yourself, or divorce yourself from reality, rather. And so it happened about 2 years after, I think it was around 1985. This movie was running on Channel 11 in New York. King of Comedy. So I watched it for the first time then on television, edited. Well, there's not a whole lot to edit from this movie. There's not much to censor. You know, it's probably one of the only a couple of PG rated movies that Martin Scorsese, who directed this picture, had made. This one was rated PG. So Robert De Niro, Jerry Lewis, you know, that type of movie. And I remember the ad campaign for the movie. And the film was the biggest flop of 1983. Don't look for me to, you know, to verify that. Just ask Martin Scorsese. If you search YouTube, you'll find his comments about the film. The film lasted in theaters about a week and a half, and then that was it. Particularly in New York. It was gone. Before anyone even had a chance to check it out. But the curious thing about the King of Comedy was that when it was on television, every once in a while it would show up, and I would record it on tape. And I started watching the King of Comedy over and over again. And to this day, I don't know what it is about the film. I mean, I love the film, but I don't know what it is about it that puts a hold on me. I just kind of like, I keep revisiting it every once in a while. And people do talk about it a lot now, more so than back in 1983. It was ahead of its time. It's a black comedy. It's somewhat satirical, for sure. Rupert Pupkin, played by Robert De Niro, he wants to be the late night host. He wants to replace Jerry Lewis, who plays a character named Jerry Langford, obviously modeled on Johnny Carson at the time for The Tonight Show. And he feels he has practiced his bits in the basement and recorded them, and that should be enough, and he should be the new late night king. And it gets to the point where he kidnaps Jerry Langford in order to have a spot on The Tonight Show, or, well, something akin to The Tonight Show, doing the monologue, opening monologue. Now, but to this day, I still don't understand what it is about the film, because there's not much flash in it. The camera work is fairly static to a certain extent. It's and yet it's still a very cinematic venture, the movie. It just somehow you're pulled in, and you are going along for this ride, and it's a strange ride, King of Comedy. But my point of mentioning King of Comedy is the fact that it showed there was more to cinema than what I had grasped initially. Again, I was really young, but that's really where it started. And after the King of Comedy, I saw Taxi Driver, which was on Channel 11 as well. Obviously, that was heavily censored. And when I saw the full unedited version, which was playing on cable back in 1990, then I could see why they censored quite a few things, especially the final dramatic shootout. But that really introduced me to Martin Scorsese. And it introduced me more to seeing more films by Stanley Kubrick, who was a name I, only knew from 2001: A Space Odyssey at that early time. Films by certainly Louis Bunuel, but Akira Kurosawa, and so on and so forth. Ingmar Bergman, for sure. I've seen a lot of Ingmar Bergman's films. And the King of Comedy kind of put that on the template for me. And to this day, I owe quite a debt of gratitude to that picture. So Raiders of the Lost Ark, I would say, changed my life because I became more interested in movies than ever before. But it was really the King of Comedy that made me more interested in seeking out more than just pure entertainment movies. That there was more to life than just being entertained by a movie. That you have to, you want to take an adventure going somewhere you've never been before, or you want to see other aspects of the world and morality and sin and relationships and everything that doesn't really necessarily involve spaceships and bullwhips and globetrotting archaeologists. So that's really what did it. So Martin Scorsese kind of cemented the very idea of looking beyond my narrow margin of cinema. And now it's just part of my DNA. It may be hard to believe, but technically speaking, I have not really seen nearly as many movies as you might think. I've seen a lot, but there are film critics who've seen much more than I have. And it's only because I've revisited films and tried to see how certain things were done. The sound, the line of dialogue, a camera movement, an edit that kind of caught me off guard. And oh, what were they doing there? Things are going on in the background that may not realize that reflect everything. The soundtrack. I mean, just so many different aspects that you may not grasp initially from one film that you consider a great film or even a very good one. And that's why. So, although I've seen many films, some of which I've instantly forgotten because they weren't very good at all, or they were just generic, versus many great films, some which I need to revisit because I've only seen maybe once, and many others that I would like to still see. So, I'm still young and I can still do this, but, and I write about them, so that takes time. I don't write about every single film I see. Lately, I have, I guess, in the last 10, 15 years, but prior to that, I didn't always write about everything. Sometimes I didn't know what to say. Um, so there's that, you know. But anyway, I thought I would just share that. So movies are my DNA, and it all became a fact for the rest of my life thanks to The King of Comedy. So there you go. So if you haven't seen The King of Comedy, please do check it out. It is lacerating black comedy. Every year, the film becomes more and more about now. It certainly applies to now, more so than it did in 1983. So do check it out. And tell me your thoughts. What film changed your life? What film made you want to watch films and perhaps even have more of an adventurous search for other types of films beyond Hollywood, beyond even American independent films, foreign films, whatever the case may be. And let me your thoughts, and please subscribe to my channel. I think I've gotten 2 new subscribers in the last 6 weeks. So yeah, there you go. And next video I'm going to do will be discussing the box office of The Fabelmans. Generally, box office is something I've always looked at in the past, but now more than ever, I think it's important to really illustrate how much of what we're told by the studios about box office is not necessarily the truth. Fabelmans is a box office disaster, unfortunately. It did not come anywhere close to its budget, but what will be interesting is looking how it was grossing per screen average and comparing that to other movies and the average budget of a movie and the marketing budget. Very interesting. So that will be my next video. So until then, please subscribe to my channel. And this is Jerry Saravia the Movies, signing off.